Kansas's record might not show it, but they are a good football team, and they pose a real threat to Iowa State. Luckily, I have the answers on how Iowa State can shut down everything that Kansas does well.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the number one sports podcast network. I'm your host, Nick Marvitz. Thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to hit subscribe down below so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we are doing a deep dive on Kansas. I've watched some film. I have some thoughts. We're going to start with their offense. What do they do well, and what can Iowa State do to stop Kansas? Then in the second segment, we're going to take a look at what they do defensively and where I think Iowa State can strike most effectively. Then finally, to round out today's show, we're going through and doing a little bit of a panic meter situation. How do I feel right now about this game? Obviously, it's not Saturday yet, so adjustments can be made. But right now, I'll let you know at the end of today's episode. Before we get that far, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Kansas is one of those teams that it's really easy to look at what they've done this season and come up with a very solid feeling on the team. And I will say, I've said this earlier this week, I watched some Kansas at the beginning of the season, and I was not shocked per se, but definitely like my ears perked up. They look really good when you watch them, but it's been a while since I watched them, admittedly. So when I see their schedule and who they've beat and who they've lost to, I mean, their wins are Oklahoma State, UCF, West Virginia, Wagner, and Fresno State. It's easy to be like, all right, well, they beat the teams they're supposed to, and they lose to the teams that they're supposed to. Like, they're perfectly mid. That is Kansas this year. And while there is an element of truth to that, at the end of the day, you have to score more points than your opponent. I get that. Kansas is really good, okay? Actually, talent-wise. And I understand what Matt Campbell said when he said, for position by position, Kansas is extremely talented. He said maybe the most talented Iowa State's faced. I don't know if I would go that far, but definitely very, very talented. So when we start this, talking about Kansas's offense, understand that in what I've seen, watching the games that Kansas has played this season, Kansas is very good. They are very capable of putting up points, of putting, together drives and scoring plays and things of that nature. I just think there's ways that Iowa State's going to be able to stop them. That being said, there's always two sides to the coin. Kansas is very good at making you decide and then based on your decision, beating you. So there is that element in play as well. I got a few things that I think Kansas does pretty consistently, things that they definitely like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about those and what I think Iowa State can do to basically counteract those. One thing that I see Kansas do a lot, now I'm not saying this is the only thing they do, and sometimes they break it out more often than others, in certain games, but they like the screen game, the hidden screens, the kind of counter back, bring the back out of the field, look like a little bit of a flat route, bring him back underneath, three linemen that took off. They love the screen game. And we've seen what Dom Orange is able to do in the screen game this season. And we got some unbelievably high praise from about Dom Orange this week. Rightfully so. Dom is an unbelievable player and honestly just very underrated. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of people still are very high on him. That's just how good I think he is. But I am kind of leaning on Dom here when it comes to stopping the screen plays. He's very good at understanding, oh, that's a little too easy. Right. I'm not a defensive lineman. Okay. But in communication with defensive linemen, they always say, if it's too easy, it probably is. There's probably something coming right over your head. And Dom has, from what I've seen, a very good feeling of when it's too easy, when to back off, and when to be ready for that throw right over top of his head. I will say some of Kansas's screen routes are actually quite deep. He might throw them like 3-4 yards past the line of scrimmage. And I don't know if Dom really can necessarily stop that. They're kind of long developing screenplays, and I give Kansas credit for that. That's an extremely tough play to stop. So I'm not going to lean on Dom for that. But I think across the board, the majority of the stops can come from Dom Orange. And I think that's a guy that we have to count on. Now, when I lay out the rest of how I see this defense shaping up, you'll see that I think there are other ways that Iowa State can basically counteract that with one position in particular I'll get to in a second. But I do want to lean on Dom here. And I'm only leaning on him because I trust him. Okay. Next up, the run game. Okay. For the majority of Kansas's offense, my general takeaway, and I could be wrong on this, this is just my opinion, they really like to play this east and west. They really like to stretch the field to the boundaries a lot of the time. Really, the only time that they don't is either on a quick pass, a quick little curl underneath, or in the run game, they are definitely willing to get north and south. Okay. I don't know how often they're going to do that. Obviously, against Iowa State, they're going to game plan, right? They're going to scheme up what they think Iowa State can't stop. But what I've seen this season is they are not afraid to run up the middle. And that's really going to come down to, yes, Dom, again, I actually have him written out for these first two. Dom is kind of, as we talked about, or as was talked about this week, mostly by Matt Campbell, he's that run stuffer. He's able to just take up gaps in the middle. Matt Campbell said every defensive lineman wants sacks, but Dom Orange is very good at just being that selfless guy that's willing to clog the front of the line. And I think that this is going to come down to how the defensive line resets the line of scrimmage. As Matt Campbell said against Kansas, what does Dom Orange do? Not only Dom, of course, but he's in the middle and in a very north-south play. One of the first guys, most important guys in that situation. So the defensive line is going to be huge there. Can they clog the holes, reset the line of scrimmage, not allow Kansas to do what they want? And then obviously linebackers have to flow. Caleb Bacon being back for this game is going to be big. And we'll get back to linebackers here in a second, but they have to attack downhill when they identify it as a run. In watching, Kansas, they do run a lot of option type plays, RPO type stuff. So it could get burnt that way. And honestly, between the pass game and the run game, I think I'm probably a little bit more scared, quote unquote, of the run game just because Daniels is effectively a runner. So they kind of have more guys that can run the ball, if that makes sense. When they run the ball, they're kind of an 11-man team as opposed to a 10-man team versus when they're passing. And when they pass, they can run. It's a whole thing. All right. Kansas offense, very complicated. I'm sure you can imagine that. It's a D1 Power 4 program. Like they're not going to make it super easy on you. But I will say, if I had to lean one way, I would be okay with them bringing a little bit of pressure once you identify it as a run. Next up, the Daniels run game, as I just kind of alluded to. I think the backers just have to flow for that. And really, I don't actually have it written down here for this point, but I think it's very important because this is more so actual designed runs for Daniels. The backers have to flow, but we have to have a guy watching Daniels at all times. And that's where it comes to my next point. Daniels' playmaking ability. Okay, there's going to be pass plays where Daniels takes off. There's going to be plays that don't go exactly how they're supposed to, and Daniels flips field. You got to have a guy, I think every single play this game, I'm okay with saying this, every single snap, there needs to be a guy whose sole responsibility is Jalon Daniels. He has the ability to basically do anything. You need to have a guy specifically on him at all times. That's just my opinion. Finally, like I said, they like to stretch the field. They're very east to west at a lot of times. In the run game, at the line of scrimmage, very important to set the edge. Very important to stay home. They're not they do definitely run some misdirection, some crazy stuff, but who does it nowadays? You need to set the edge and not let them get way outside because they'll get all the way out to that 52 and a third, not quite 53 and a third before they turn it upfield. Got to be willing to set that edge and run laterally with them. I do think Kansas is very stoppable. They are very talented, very good offensively, but I seriously think Iowa State's going to be okay. I imagine the way that this goes is Iowa State shuts down Kansas's run game probably more than they like, makes them quote unquote one-dimensional through the pass game, and allows them to drop 8 with a spy more often than not. I would like that. I don't really want to see a ton of pressure brought from John Haycock in this game, which is contradictory to what I've said in the past. I generally want him to bring pressure, but against a team like this, against a quarterback like Jalon Daniels, I'm not a huge fan of that, personally. If you rush 5 and Daniels beats you, I know he can, right? Now you've basically got 6 on the back end as opposed to 7 or 8, right? I'm okay with them dropping more guys with a spy. Man versus zone, I'm not going to get into. That's a coach's decision. But I'm okay with them sticking back a little bit more and making Kansas come to them. You don't want to end up with an 88-yard touchdown like you had against Arizona State, right? Like Sims, you really only had to beat one layer. You want to make Kansas beat you through multiple different layers. I don't think they're going to be able to. I do think Iowa State's going to be able to keep up with them, though. Even if the defense doesn't score, doesn't hold them, I think that the Kansas defense has a lot of holes in it based on what I'm seeing right here. So we're going to talk about that coming up right here after this. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push and you predicted it. It is so thrilling. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So I think Iowa State's got a shot defensively, right? There's just against Kansas's offense. It's going to be a challenge, right? Kansas is very good, very talented, but I think we have the personnel to do it. I think we have the coach to do it. And I've honestly been shocked with Iowa State's defense this season, considering the circumstances. Offensively, this is where I need to see Iowa State shine. I think they absolutely have to beat Kansas, but that's just my opinion here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the number one sports podcast network. When I looked at Kansas defensively, I noticed a few things, okay? I've only got a few written down here because defense is so much harder to really figure out what the plan is as opposed to what's reactionary. The first thing is that I see Kansas, not always, but definitely does like to bring pressure. And we'll get back to that defensive line in a second here, but certainly Kansas is not. They will bring linebackers into the equation. They will bring stunts onto the field to try to confuse, in this case, Rocco Becht and his offensive line to set the protection wonky and bring guys, from the corner on an end around, whatever it is. Kansas will do that. I think the best counter for this is the quick game. Okay. And we talked about this yesterday as far as things that I think Iowa State's offense needs to do in this game to get momentum, to get the ball going, to get guys on the offense comfortable. Once you feel better, it's kind of like that composure on NCAA 26 or whatever. When you're cold, everything seems to go wrong. But once you're hot, once you've got that composure, you feel like you're in the game, everything goes a lot smoother. And I said Iowa State needs to lend to the quick game. I think Rocco's significantly better there, and I think that less can go wrong. Now, that's not necessarily true. It's easy to throw a pick six on a quick out, right? I understand that. But I think that Iowa State and Rocco are better in the quick game, and that's going to counter nicely Kansas's ability to bring pressure and to try to confuse the offensive line and bring from spots that Rocco wouldn't see. If Rocco's not holding the ball for 3 seconds, the quick game, essentially, those stunts, those crazy, bringing pressure, it doesn't really matter. It just doesn't have enough time to develop for it to make an impact. Now, obviously, you can't throw a quick 5-yard out on every play or a 5-yard curl on every play. So I understand that, that can't be the entire game plan. And honestly, it shouldn't be the entire game plan. So we'll get to that in a second. But the next thing is to highlight specifically Kansas's front four. They're very good. As Matt Campbell said, very deep defensive line. They're very capable of getting to the quarterback on their own. Now, as I just said, the quick game, of course, can combat that. But if they're dropping, would that be 7, bringing 4, it's a little bit tougher. And we'll get into what I feel like Kansas likes to do in the secondary here next point. But as far as those front 4 goes, I think it's going to come down to, can Rocco either A, identify what the defensive line is doing and set the protection correctly, and B, can he run, right? Can he evade? Because I think that's one of Rocco's biggest strengths. We just haven't really seen it a ton this season, namely since the start of the losing streak. And probably for one hit in particular. I think there's an element of we want to protect Rocco. We want to keep him healthy. But based on the comments that Matt Campbell said, I don't know where his health is at. So I don't really know where to go with that whole situation. But I do think there's going to be an element of, if Rocco isn't able to get rid of the ball quickly, right, and he's forced into these situations where the front 4 are coming for him, he needs to be able to evade. That's just plain and simple. We can't be taking sacks against Kansas, get behind the sticks. Now, when it comes to the run game against those first four, I do trust Carson Hansen and our offensive line to move bodies. I talked about that yesterday. You got to lean on the run game. I stand by that. Based on what I've seen against Kansas, they're going to be tough. They're going to be tough to beat. But I don't hate the idea of Iowa State going up straight through those front four, forcing Kansas to put bodies in the box, right? Forcing Kansas to kind of go away from the pass, force them to stop the run, and give Rocco the opportunity to have a little bit of bigger passing lanes, right? They don't need to necessarily blitz six, but if you've got six guys in the box, it's a little bit more spare out on the outside. I don't hate that. I want them to lean on the run game here because the front four for Kansas are good no matter how you slice it. But I trust Iowa State and I trust Carson Hansen especially to just plow through them. Now, Abusama getting outside, also a threat. Very much a different threat. I think he can also go up the middle. But nonetheless, the last thing I want to talk about here is Kansas in the secondary. I do think Kansas, this is just my interpretation. Yet again, not a defensive coordinator, not a film study guy. It's not what I'm paid to do. But I love doing it. And so watching Kansas this season, they love to play zone. And this is where I think Rocco, it's going to be tough, okay? Because on one hand, if you identify the zone correctly, it's very easy to know where to throw the ball, right? For example, one thing I have written down is Kansas in cover two, like every team, very susceptible up the seam. They're very, they get beat that way quite a bit. Now, is it over top? Is it through the seam? Whatever, depends on the play. But Kansas against cover two, especially, I feel like if Rocco identifies cover two and says, all right, we've got that route or hot routes to it or whatever, he knows where he's putting that ball. Doesn't necessarily depend on a man beating a man, right? Trusting a guy. You're trusting a zone. You're throwing to a spot. You're not beating a guy. The flip side to that is you have to identify the zone correctly. So, and this is most of the time, right? They do run man at times in the middle of the field, but for the most part, they're running zone. So Rocco's going to be tasked with effectively identifying what the zone is and throwing into the gaps that each zone has. Now, I'm not going to lay out whatever each zone's gaps are, but, for example, cover two, the seam. This is where I was talking about yesterday. I don't hate the idea of, I hate to say this, but essentially taking away the option routes from the wide receivers. Tell them to go out there and run this route. And then Rocco looks at the defense and says, all right, this is cover three man. All right, we got cover two with, or maybe cover six. They're splitting it here. This is what we're working with. We got a potential over here. Then we'll read to the left side, whatever. I don't hate that because now Rocco's the only one making those decisions. Now, when it comes down to the red zone, they don't always go into man, but Kansas, I feel like traditionally or more times than not, will transition into man coverage as they get closer and closer to the goal line. Not super controversial, not super crazy. I think that's pretty standard. Man up, keep them off the inside, whatever it is. Not every team does that, of course, though. So I am going to say for Iowa State, when it gets down to the red zone, for one thing, okay, and I cannot stress this enough. I don't know how to say this and really get my point across other than maybe you have to go back and hear me say it another 50 times. I don't want to see one sprint out in this game. I just don't want to see it, okay? You can have crossers. You can have confusion in zone routes because he's going from, the right hash all the way across the field to the left boundary, whatever you need to do. I don't want to see any sprint outs in this game whatsoever, especially when we get down into the red zone, because if everyone's manned up, that's an extremely tough situation, not only for each receiver to be put into, but for Rocco to be put into. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I don't want to see one single sprint out. Mauser, if you're listening, I beg of you, unless you're going to just troll me and run it every time, which I guess I can respect that as well. I just don't think that's a good plan. I don't hate, bringing guys across the coverage, but keep Rocco in the pocket. If it's going to be man, force, pre-snap motions, right? Force them to work their way through the set defense and then throw it to them in the flat or throw it to them in the corner. It's kind of like what we saw against Colorado. Force them to work through their own defense if you're in man at the goal line. Look, I know I'm not an OC. Okay, I'm not claiming to be. I just really do not want to see any sprint outs. That's my biggest thing. I don't think that's going to work against Kansas in the red zone. And I know Mauser likes to lean on that. Feels like it's something that he prefers. I don't want it. I don't want it. And if it works, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to be happy about it. I'm, I guess, satisfied that we scored. But if you see a sprint out, on Saturday in Kansas, we're in the red zone and Iowa State does a sprint out and we score. I'm not happy about it. Just know that right here, right now. But that doesn't necessarily raise my panic meter. All right. And we'll talk about the panic meter coming up right here. Iowa State playing Kansas this weekend was not a game that I necessarily had circled going into the season. I had, I think, 5, and this was one that I was, keeping an eye on because it is Iowa State versus Kansas, but not necessarily, in my opinion, one of Iowa State's toughest games this year. But it's proving to be extremely vital to the way that the tone of this season is kind of interpreted for Iowa State. And how I interpret it here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the number one sports podcast network. I think this is a very important game. I think that I interpret this as a win and it's a successful season, a loss, and maybe we need to reevaluate a few things. All right. I think Kansas is a team that Iowa State is very, very capable of beating. And that's why I say it that way. I don't look at it as, this is the win to get to 7. If they don't, they end with at most 7 wins on the season if they beat Oklahoma State. That's not how I view it. Kansas is a team that I think Iowa State should beat, can beat. And if they lose to them, we're going to have to take a look in the mirror and evaluate a few things. Is it injuries? Is it play calls? What's the situation? Is it situational with, like the punt against BYU that everybody wants to talk about? Was it one play like that? I don't think Iowa State should let it get that close. But if they do, how do they handle themselves in those types of situations? That's why I'm bringing up the panic meter today, because I do think this game is extremely important to Iowa State. And right now, okay, I'm going to put the panic meter at about a 4.5, 10 being like, I am terrified. I feel pretty confident. Okay. But there's a few things that are going into this, bumping it up to 4.5 panic meter. A couple of my reasons here. For one, it's Kansas, right? Look at the last 3 years. Obviously, Iowa State 7-3 in the last 10, but the last 3 haven't gone Iowa State's way. Got to find a way, right? Sometimes the team's just got your number. Iowa State beat Iowa, beat Kansas State this season already. Can they get the third game kind of in the series to round out the season in a positive manner? I think they can, but it's still one of those games. It's something you have to keep in the back of your mind. You have to pay attention to. Number 2, injuries, okay? Not only on the defense now, but also on the offense with Gabe Burkle. Iowa State is extremely banged up, missing a ton of guys. Now, is that an excuse? No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's making me slightly more concerned. I think if Iowa State played Kansas week 1, week 2, we'd probably be talking about this game entirely differently. Well, I know we would be talking about this game entirely differently. I wouldn't be as terrified on the defensive side of the ball, but I also trust Jon Heacock now at this point in the season based on what he did, especially against TCU. So I'm not saying that's bumping it up to an 8 for me. No, I'm not panicked. I trust Jon Heacock, and I trust the next man up mentality that Iowa State has, but I am certainly slightly more alarmed. Another reason, Kansas is very talented. I don't know exactly what's happened at every single stage of Kansas's season, and the reason that they are currently 5-5, and they've lost to Missouri. They played a very good Texas Tech, lost to Arizona. I mean, I think Iowa State handled Arizona. I think it's very fair to say that. But they beat teams like Oklahoma State and UCF. So I don't know what happened to Kansas this season, but I can't ignore the talent they have. I can't look and say, I watched their Oklahoma State game, and I hate to say this, but all the Oklahoma State fans out there, I feel for you. I mean, that's a tough watch. Kansas doesn't feel that way. Kansas looks like a good team. They look competent a lot of the time. They look scary a lot of the time. So I don't know what's not clicking for them, but something isn't there. And there is definitely an element of they have the talent to do it. That's raising the concern meter just slightly. It's not like we're facing Texas Tech here, but we're playing a good football team. It's not a bye week, right? And Iowa State needs to step up to the plate, right? Needs to kind of not be scared of the pitch, essentially, if you want to carry the baseball analogy. The other side of this, though, basically all the reasons why I'm not putting it higher, not the reasons that are bumping it up to a 4.5, but the reasons that are keeping it down. For one, Iowa State's win over TCU was enormous for the morale of this team. And just really quickly, to fire them off, Iowa State's coming off the bye. And I've talked about this week. I do think Iowa State is really good off the bye. You took the loss to BYU. Yes, I understand that. But they looked really good, and it kind of came down to 1 or 2 plays. That's a good BYU team. a team that I don't know what's going to happen with them, as far as college football playoff, as far as Big 12 championship, yada, yada, yada. But they are a good team, and a team that you being Iowa State, very competitive with, a team that you probably should have beat. Realistically, I think that was a team that Iowa State could have beat coming off the bye. We saw what they did to Arizona coming off the bye. Now Kansas, an extra week to prepare. I think Iowa State has all the ability coming off the bye to come out hot. I did talk about maybe there's some rust. I think they're going to come out firing on all cylinders, and they're going to force Kansas to, kind of try to slow the game down, essentially. Not necessarily from like yardage or scoring standpoints, but like we need to get our bearings because Iowa State is ready to roll. The last point here that I'm kind of leaning on, which I've brought up, is Kansas just doesn't seem to have it. And I'm not going to talk about this for very long because I just said it, but something is not there for Kansas this season. I don't know what it is. I'm not here to determine that. I am here to look at it and say, when it comes down to the wire, I think Iowa State's the better team. And I think that the better team wins in a lot of Kansas's duels, if you want to call them that. The better team won against Missouri. The better team won against West Virginia. That's how I view this Kansas team. And the way I see Iowa State versus Kansas right now, Iowa State is better as a team. Okay? Kansas might be better if you single out one position group versus another position group. Down the line, Iowa State is playing great as a team right now, especially coming off that win over TCU. They've had to rally through 4 straight losses. It's senior, like it's the whole thing, right? I think this is a great opportunity for Iowa State to show that this is what Iowa State football is about. This is a team that Iowa State's very capable of beating, and I feel like they can. Final few points that I'm going to get into. Number one, and these aren't necessarily keys to victory, but just things that I noticed against Kansas or watching Kansas's film. For one, I think Iowa State can't afford to get behind the sticks because that's going to result in plays that take longer to develop, and I don't like the way that Kansas brings pressure or the way that their front four look. I want Iowa State to stay on pace, lean on that run game, as I said. Another one, kind of gimme, I'll do both the gimmies, I guess, together. Turnovers and penalties, all right? Got to win the turnover battle. I don't think this is a game, we've talked about this season, this isn't a game where they need to win the turnover battle. They can, tie out at the turnover battle, but I don't think they can lose the turnover battle for a lot of obvious reasons. Penalties, both of these teams are relatively even as far as penalties on the season, average per game, yada, yada, yada. It does feel like Kansas has come at bad times, but really, when is there a good time for a penalty? So if Iowa State stays sound, does what they're supposed to do, I feel like they're very capable of winning this game, but penalties can get in the way. I don't want that to happen. Finally, this is kind of given. Rocco just needs to keep his head on, and this is going to come down to confidence. But Iowa State's going to need to score points to defeat Kansas. Shocker. And it's going to come from Rocco. The way that I see this is a great opportunity for Rocco to take off and to show that, those 4 games in the middle of the season, they are what they were. If he really is fighting through whatever he's fighting through, we basically have no information on that, which I don't love. I'm going to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of that. But whatever he's fighting through, this is an opportunity for him to show to his teammates and to potential prospects or whatever, what he's capable of doing under those circumstances. This is a kind of a legacy game, if you will, for Rocco. That's how I view it, based just on how the season has gone, very up and down. How does he control the game? I'm not saying he needs to go out there and throw 24 of 25, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, no checkdowns, reads coverages perfectly. It's not what I'm saying. He needs to command the game. Needs to read the defense. If he's given 2 plays, make the right call out of the 2, puts his throws on target, I think is a big thing. We've talked about wide receiver drops, but Rocco's throws, to be completely candid, have not been on target the last few weeks. They're close, and a few of them should have probably been brought in. But if you're a wide receiver and you're not sure where the ball's being thrown, just as a former wide receiver, not at a high level or anything, but you're going out there not confident essentially on every route. You're just out there running your route and then reacting. You don't want the offense to function that way. I want to see Rocco's throws relatively accurate to an extent. It's a very challenging game that he plays. I think the Iowa State team is very capable of beating Kansas. Like I said, panic meter probably about 4.5. I don't feel like that's high. The way I gauge that, I know it's close to half, but it could certainly be a lot higher. Let me know what you think. Where does Iowa State square up against Kansas nicely? Where do you think Kansas has the edge? What's your panic meter at? Let me know in the comments below or at Nick_Marv on X or Twitter. I appreciate you all for listening to this point in the episode. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.